The steel barrel of the Colt 45 was hot enough to scorch flesh, yet May Dutton barely registered it, pressing against her temple. What crushed her wasn't the heat, it was the hollow, unbearable emptiness of the crib behind her. The desert wind screamed through the shattered window, dragging with it the smell of charred pine and fresh blood. Still, none of it was louder than the sound looping inside her head. The scream of her 6-month-old son as he was ripped from her arms. "Please, don't take my baby." She had screamed until her throat burned raw. But the desert never answers screams. It only answers gunfire. And today, the desert was hungry for it. Arizona in 1874 didn't just make a body sweat. It baked hope dry and left it to crack. Out on Dutton Ridge, 40 miles south of Tucson, the air shimmered like broken glass under the sun. May wiped her brow with a flour-stained apron and stared through the window of the small cabin she and Jack Dutton had raised plank by plank. Jack was out by the corral fighting a stubborn horseshoe onto their roan mare Bess. He was that kind of man, steady hands, honest sweat. No gambler, no gunman. He believed the land paid you back if you bled for it long enough. 2 weeks earlier, the earth had proven him right. Silver. Not enough to make them rich, but enough to mean tomorrow for their boy Eli. Eli lay cooing in his cradle, a rough pine box padded with wool. May allowed herself a small smile. Just for a moment the weight of frontier life lifted. Then the dog barked. Not a rabbit yip, but a deep warning growl that cut short with a sharp yelp. Silence followed. May froze. She stepped to the window. 5 riders topped the ridge. They didn't ride like soldiers. They didn't ride like Apaches. They rode loose and careless, the way men ride when the law is days away and they know it. At their head sat a man in a black duster, his hat pulled low, shadowing a face shaped by fire and bad choices. Rook Calder. His name drifted through saloons from Tombstone to Bisbee, always followed by a hush. May saw Jack drop the mare's hoof and reach for the Winchester by the fence. He never made it. Crack! The sound snapped through the yard like a dry branch breaking short, sharp finale. Jack spun his shoulder, bursting red, and collapsed into the dust. Jack May screamed, bolting for the door. She threw it open as the riders thundered into the yard. Rook Calder reined in his black stallion, the animal snorting beside Jack's fallen body. Jack groaned, crawling for his rifle until a massive figure dropped from the saddle. Boone Cutter, greasy-haired and broad as a barn door, kicked the Winchester away. "Stay down," Pilgrim Boone sneered, spitting tobacco onto Jack's clean shirt. May stood frozen on the porch, heart slamming against her ribs. She snatched the double-barrel shotgun from beside the door and leveled it at Calder. Her hands shook. "Get off my land," she said, voice trembling but loud. Calder chuckled dry and hollow. He didn't glance at the gun. He looked only at her eyes, black as coal. "Now, Mrs. Dutton, that's no way to greet visitors. We heard you struck silver." "We got nothing," May lied. "Just dirt and debt." "We checked the Tucson assay office," Calder said lazily. "We know what you filed and that you haven't mailed the claim yet." Jack coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. "May, go inside." Calder's revolver cleared leather. "The deed, Mrs. Dutton, or your husband dies. Then you do. Then this shack burns." May's eyes flew to Jack. He was bleeding out. The deed was under the loose floorboard beneath Eli's cradle. "I'll get it," she sobbed. "Just don't hurt him." She lowered the shotgun and ran inside, tearing up the floorboard with shaking hands. She grabbed the parchment, and a shadow fell across the cradle. Boone Cutter stood in the doorway. He wasn't looking at the deed. He was looking at Eli. "Boss wants insurance," Boone grunted. He reached down and lifted Eli by the back of his sleep sack. "No," May screamed, clawing at his face. "Let him go. Take the silver. Take everything." Boone backhanded her hard. The world flipped white and gray as she slammed into the stone hearth. Through the ringing in her ears she heard Rook Calder's voice from outside. We take the brat. If she wanted him back, she was to bring the remaining silver samples to the Devil's Anvil by tomorrow's sundown, alone. And the husband Boone Cutter asked, stepping forward with the shrieking infant clenched in his arm. Leave him, one of the Calder men said coldly. He's gut-shot. Coyotes'll have him before the moon clears the ridge. May Dutton tried to rise. Her legs buckled beneath her. She clawed forward instead, dragging herself over the splintered porch boards, nails tearing and bleeding as they caught in the wood. Please, she rasped. Please don't take my baby. She reached the edge of the porch, just in time to see them gallop off, swallowed whole by a rolling cloud of alkali dust. Eli's cries grew thin, lost beneath the thunder of hooves. Jack Dutton lay motionless in the dirt. May crawled to him and collapsed against his chest. He was gone. Whatever light had lived behind his eyes had already fled. She stayed there for a long, empty hour, the sun hammering down in the desert silence, pressing in until it roared in her ears. She wanted to let go, to lie still and let the heat finish what the men had started. Then another sound broke through the haze, not a cry, a click. A horse's hoof striking stone. May lifted her head. A lone rider waited at the edge of the trees on a paint horse. He hadn't ridden with Rook Calder. He had been watching. He was Apache. Bare-chested beneath a worn leather vest, long black hair bound back with a strip of red cloth. A Winchester rested across his saddle, but it wasn't aimed. He simply observed, silent and sharp as a hunting hawk. May lunged for the shotgun. Empty. The shells were gone, spent or scattered in the struggle. She seized a pitchfork from the porch rail, gripping it with whitening knuckles. "Get out!" she screamed. Grief flared into blinding white-hot fury. "You here to pick the bones? Is that it?" "That it?" The Apache didn't flinch. He sat tall in the saddle, his face carved from weathered bronze. Not young, maybe 40, with scars tracing a hard life across his arms and chest. He urged his horse forward at a slow walk, hands open and plain to see. May backed away, tangled in her skirts, and fell beside Jack's body. "Stay back." He stopped 10 paces away. His gaze moved from Jack to the burning horizon, where Calder had vanished, and finally to May. Then he dismounted in one smooth motion. There was no war paint on him. Only road dust, the mark of a traveler. He reached into his saddlebag, drew out a canteen, and stepped closer, tossing it so it landed in the dirt near her hand. "Why?" May whispered, her voice breaking. The man touched 2 fingers to his lips, then sliced his hand flat through the air. Silence. He passed her without hesitation, ignoring the pitchfork, and knelt beside Jack. He checked for a pulse, though none could be there. He closed Jack's eyes and murmured words in a tongue that sounded like wind, cutting through stone. Then he rose and faced May. He pointed to the tracks leading out of the yard, held up 5 fingers, then gestured to the baby's blanket lying on the porch. He cradled invisible weight in his arms. "You saw them," May gasped. "You saw them take him." The Apache nodded once. "Can you track them?" His eyes locked on hers, dark, fierce, and absolute. This time he didn't nod. He turned to his horse, drew a second rifle from the scabbard, a long-barreled Buffalo Sharps, and held it out to her. May stared at the weapon. "I don't have money. They took the deed. They took everything." He shook his head and tapped his chest. "Sorek," he said the name rough and strained, as if his throat had once been badly damaged. It was the only word he spoke. "Sorek," May repeated. He motioned for her to stand, then pointed at the sinking sun. Light was bleeding away. May looked down at Jack. "I can't leave him for the animals." Sorek moved to the shed, found a shovel, and began to dig. He worked with a brutal, relentless strength that unsettled her. In less than 20 minutes, the grave was ready. They laid Jack into the red earth he had loved. No coffin, only soil and sky. May whispered a broken version of the Lord's Prayer, tears streaking mud down her face. When she rose, the grief was still there, heavy, crushing. but now it was sheathed in iron. She had to get Eli back. "I need a horse," she said. "The best one's spooked, but she'll ride." Sorek waited while May saddled the roan. She grabbed a coat, a box of shells for the Sharp's rifle, and filled 2 canteens. The sun slid lower. They were going after her son. She packed no food. Eating meant nothing until her arms closed around her son again. They rode out as the sun bled into the horizon, staining the sky, the deep purple of a bruised plum. Sorek took point, his gaze fixed on the ground. The Calder men hadn't bothered masking their trail. Arrogance left tracks as clear as confession. They were riding straight toward the Devil's Anvils, a jagged stone ruin miles deep in the Badlands. As they pushed on, May Dutton studied the silent rider ahead of her. Why was he helping? In this country, Apaches and settlers killed first and asked nothing. There was a war burning across the territory, a hard, merciless war. But Sorek rode like a man unclaimed. No banners, no colors. A ghost moving through blood and dust. Night fell sharp and cold. They didn't slow. Moonlight washed the desert in pale silver. Sorek lifted a hand. He slid from the saddle and pressed his ear to the earth. When he rose, he signaled May to dismount, then pointed into a narrow box canyon. He drew his knife and scored a line in the dirt. Tripwire. A rear guard. A trap left behind. May's chest tightened. "Is Eli there?" she whispered. Sorek shook his head. He motioned for her to stay with the horses, then melted into the dark so quiet even the brittle brush stayed still beneath his moccasins. May waited knuckles tight on the Sharp's rifle. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. Then a wet choking sound drifted from ahead. A gurgle swallowed by the night. After it, the call of a nightjar wrong for this valley. Sorek stepped out of the shadows, wiping his blade on his trouser leg. He waved her forward. They passed 2 men, slumped against boulders, throats open clean, Calder lookouts. May swallowed bile rising in her throat. This was the world now. Kill or be killed. Sorek pointed to the tracks spilling out the far end of the canyon, then stopped. He crouched over crushed sage, pinched something from the dirt and lifted it into the moonlight. A silver rattle. Eli's rattle. May bit back a sob, reaching for it. Sorek placed it in her palm. For a heartbeat, his face softened, then hardened again. He pointed down. The trail split. 3 riders headed for the Devil's Anvil. 2 broke west toward the Mexican border. The baby was with the 2 going west. The others were bait meant to bleed May at the anvil when she came with silver. Horror settled cold in her bones. Rook Calder never meant to give him back, she said. He's selling him. She swallowed. He's taking him to Mexico. Sorek nodded once. He studied the westward trail, then swung into the saddle and turned his horse. The chase was on. The western route was merciless. Flat scrub rose into knife-edged ridges and treacherous cuts. The dragon's spine, where horses snapped legs and men dried out alive. By the next noon, May's lips were split and bleeding. The sun pressed down like iron. Every time she blinked, she saw Eli's face. Was he hungry? Crying, did they give him water? Sorek never slowed. Heat didn't touch him. He read the land like scripture-broken twigs, shifted stones. Once he stopped and lifted a discarded cheroot. He smelled it, then raised 2 fingers. 2 hours ahead. They were closing. During a brief watering stop, May asked again, voice raw. Why help a white woman? My people haven't been kind to yours. Sorek met her eyes, then pulled a leather pouch from his neck. He opened it and revealed a faded, tin-type photograph. A native woman and a small boy, dressed in a blend of Apache and settler clothes. He tapped the boy, then pointed skyward. Dead. He touched the woman, then pointed south. Mexico. Taken. May understood. He wasn't chasing mercy. He was hunting ghosts. Slavers had stolen his family, perhaps the same ring Calder was selling Eli to now. "I'm sorry," May said softly. Sorek tucked the picture away and mounted up. Shared grief bound them tighter than words ever could. They were no longer settler and stranger. They were two parents with hollows carved through their chests, riding straight toward damnation. As the sun dipped low, throwing long, blood-dark shadows across the canyon floor, they heard it. A rifle cracked. Then another. Sorek drove his horse into a hard gallop, May Dutton thundering after him. They crested a ridge and looked down into a dry riverbed below. Two riders, Rook Calder's men, were trapped behind a fallen tangle of logs, firing wildly. Shots rained down on them from the cliffs above. "Who's shooting at them?" May shouted over the wind. Sorek narrowed his eyes and pulled a brass spyglass from his saddlebag. He studied the cliffs, then handed it to her. May raised the glass. 3 men stood on the high rock badges, dulled by dust pinned to their chests, Arizona Rangers. "Rangers?" May cried, relief surging through her. Thank God they found them. She urged her horse forward, ready to shout. Sorek's hand snapped onto her bridle, wrenching the reins back hard. "Let go," she protested. "Those are lawmen." Sorek shook his head sharply. "No." He pointed at the spyglass again. "Look," he rasped. The first word he'd spoken in hours. May looked closer. One ranger, tall with a heavy mustache, worked the lever of his rifle. As he turned to speak, the sun flashed off his saddle horn. Hanging there was a silver-studded bridle. May sucked in a breath. "That's Jack Dutton's bridle, the one Calder had stolen along with the deed." "They're not rangers," she whispered, the color draining from her face. "They're Calder men dressed up as law." It snapped into place. Rook Calder had planned for this. If May found help, if a posse formed, these men were the answer. They were cleaning house, killing the runners, taking the baby and the papers for themselves, cutting Calder out, or worse, carrying out his orders. "Eli is down there," May said, panic clawing up her throat. "In the middle of it." Below, the 2 men in the riverbed fired back desperately. Between them, on the sand, lay a small bundle. The baby wasn't moving. "We have to stop them," May said, sliding around into the chamber of the Sharp's rifle. Sorek took in the scene, 3 shooters on the cliffs, 2 below. Then he looked at her. He drew his Winchester and pointed toward the high ground. "We take the cliffs," May said. 3 against 2. Sorek's mouth curved into a grim smile, cold and frightening. He raised one finger, one Apache. He spurred his horse not toward the gunfight, but up a narrow, crumbling goat path that wound behind the false rangers. May followed her pulse hammering. 6 guns waited ahead. She was a farmer's wife. He was a silent ghost. And her baby lay helpless in the dust. At the top, Sorek dismounted and signaled for quiet. They slipped through the manzanita brush, slow and low. The fake rangers were 50 yards ahead, focused on the riverbed. "Finish them," one shouted. "Calder wants the brat quiet." May lifted the Sharp's rifle. The heavy barrel wavered. She had never shot a man. Coyotes, snakes, crippled horses, yes. Not this. Sorek laid a steadying hand on the barrel. He nodded toward the leader, the one wearing Jack's bridle. His eyes said everything. "You take him. I take the rest." May drew a breath. She saw Jack bleeding in the dirt, saw Eli alone on the sand. She squeezed the trigger. The buffalo rifle slammed back into her shoulder like a mule's kick, bruising bone. The blast tore through the canyon, thunder rolling off stone. On the opposite ridge, the false ranger jerked hard. Cole Riker, the gunman known across the territory, killer for hire out of Dodge, took the .50 caliber slug square in the chest. He made no sound. The air burst from his lungs in a pink mist. Then he pitched forward and tumbling 50 feet into the dry riverbed below. "Take cover!" The remaining 2 shouted, diving behind rocks. But Sorek was already moving. He didn't fire from stillness. He flowed over stone and shadow. Winchester flashing the lever, snapping in a blur as the fight truly began. Crack! 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 Sorek pinned them down, forcing heads to stay buried, while May Dutton fumbled with the single-shot sharps. Her hands trembled. The first cartridge slipped and vanished into the dust. Breathe, she ordered herself. Breathe, or Eli dies. Below in the dry wash, the two kidnappers shouted in confusion. Seeing fire rain from the cliffs, they chose flight. One, a lanky kid, barely 19, snatched the bundle and lunged for a horse. No, May screamed. She snapped the breech shut, lifted the heavy octagon barrel, and aimed not at the boy, but at the ground in front of him. She fired. The slug shattered sandstone, spraying knife-edged shards into the horse's path. The animal reared. The boy was thrown. The bundle arced through the air and landed in soft sand. The kid scrambled, clawing for his pistol, then a shot cracked from above. Sorek. The boy folded, clutching his leg. The second kidnapper saw the turn and bolted, spurring his mount down the wash and vanishing around a bend. Clear, Sorek rasped. He had finished the other two false rangers on the cliff, one still, the other groaning, a shoulder wrecked. May didn't wait. She dropped the heavy rifle and slid down the scree dress, tearing palms skinned raw. She hit the sand running. Her lungs burned. Her legs felt poured with lead, but she ran faster than she ever had. She reached the bundle. Silence. Cold dread, heavier than the mountains, settled in her gut. She fell to her knees, shaking fingers, peeling back the dusty blanket. Eli's face was red, streaked with dirt and tears. His eyes were closed. Eli, she whispered. Oh God, please. She touched his cheek. It burned. Fever, dehydration, exposure. Then his small chest hitched. A thin whimper slipped from cracked lips. He was alive. May crushed him to her chest, sobbing. Relief surged so hard it nearly took her under. She rocked him, kissed his grimy forehead, tears spilling onto his face. Mama's here, she breathed. I've got you. Sorek came down the slope, leading the horses, rifle steady on the wounded kid who tried to crawl away. He kicked the pistol from the boy's hand. He looked from May to the boy and drew his knife. No, May said, steel in her voice. She stood holding Eli tight. We need answers. Who sent you? She demanded. Was it Rook Calder? The boy spat blood. Calder. He's the devil. He paid us to run the baby to the border, sell him to an orphanage in Sonora. 500 in gold. Where is Calder now? May pressed. The boy laughed wetly. You think those men on the cliff were at Calder's coming? Whole crew. He wanted to watch it finished. You just killed his foreman, Cole Riker, he wheezed. He'll skin you alive. Sorek tilted his head, sniffed the wind, then signed fast. Dust. Many riders. 5 miles. We have to go, May said. She checked Eli. He needed water shade medicine. Where? She swallowed. We can't outrun them like this. Sorek pointed north at a jagged silhouette under the sinking sun. San Pedro, an old Spanish mission abandoned half a century after an Apache raid. Walls. A well. Defensible, May asked. Sorek nodded, but his eyes warned her. A grave if we stay too long. They tied the wounded boy to his horse. May refused to leave him to die even after everything. They rode hard. As they passed beneath the mission's broken stone arch, the first shots of Calder's vanguard echoed off the canyon walls. The siege had begun. San Pedro was a skeleton of the past, the chapel roof long collapsed, rafters gaping like ribs. But the bell tower stood. The perimeter walls were 3 feet thick, adobe and stone. Sorek moved with ruthless efficiency. He barricaded the main gate with fallen timbers and rubble. He stabled the horses in the old sacristy, shielded from stray fire. May set a triage corner where the roof still gave shade. She soaked a cloth from her canteen and cooled Eli's burning skin. The baby lay limp against May Dutton's chest, his breath shallow and uneven. I need water, she said through clenched teeth. Real water, not this warm slop from the canteen. Sorek pointed toward the courtyard. In its center stood an ancient stone well. He lifted a bucket tied to a fraying rope. He took one step out and a bullet sparked off the archway inches from his face. Rook Calder's men held the high ridges ringing the mission. Any move into the open meant death. Pinned, Sorek muttered. I'm going, May said, starting forward. Sorek seized her arm and shook his head. He's my son, May snapped, and he's burning up. Sorek met her eyes, then took the bucket. He stripped off his vest and waited, watching the ridgeline, counting the rhythm between volleys. Then he ran. He zigzagged across the courtyard like a shadow in dying light. Bullets kicked dust at his heels. Thwip, thwip, thwip. He reached the well and dropped the bucket. The rope hissed as it slid. He hauled it up, muscles screaming. A shot cracked louder than the rest, a sharps from the ridge. Sorek jerked as the blood burst from his upper arm. He never let go. He turned and sprinted back, water sloshing over the rim, diving through the archway, as lead shredded the stone behind him. He skidded across the floor and shoved the bucket toward May, chest heaving, blood streaming down his bicep. You're hit, May gasped, tearing a strip from her petticoat. Sorek ignored the wound. He pointed to the baby. Water. May bathed Eli, tipping drops between his lips. Slowly he swallowed. Color crept back into his cheeks. Outside, a voice boomed, carried and amplified by the rocks. Mrs. Dutton. It was Rook Calder. May slipped to a firing slit. Calder sat on his black stallion just beyond rifle range, flanked by a dozen men smoking a cheroot, like he had all the time in the world. You're a stubborn woman, Calder called. I respect that. But you're out of time. You don't own anything here, May shouted back. I have my son. Calder laughed. I'm not talking about the brat. I mean the man, the Apache. May glanced at Sorek, who was binding his arm, face carved from stone. That man Calder went on, voice dropping cold, is called Sorek. The army knows him as the Butcher of Bravado Creek. There's a $1,000 bounty on his head, but I don't want the money. May's heart sank. He killed my brother 3 years ago, Calder said. Slit his throat in his sleep. May looked at Sorek. He held her gaze. He didn't deny it. Send him out, Calder offered. You and the boy walk free. On my word. Your word's worth less than snake oil, May yelled. Think it through, Calder shouted back. Night's coming. My men are restless. If we storm that place, everyone dies, including the baby. Calder turned his horse and rode back to his line. May sagged against the wall. She faced Sorek. Is it true? Did you kill his brother? Sorek rose and took a piece of charcoal drawing on the white adobe. A circle. Inside it, small figures, women and children, then men with guns. Calder men. He pointed to one figure and mimed shooting a woman. My wife. May understood. Calder's brother had been a raider. Sorek hadn't murdered him. He had executed him for slaughter. He won't let us leave, May said quietly, even if I give you up. He killed Jack Dutton. He tried to sell Eli. Sorek nodded and checked his ammunition. 6 rounds left in the Winchester. May counted hers 3 for the sharps. The wounded boy had a Colt with 5 shots. Outside waited 12 men. The sun was sinking fast. Night did not fall on the San Pedro mission. It collapsed. Night collapsed like a caved-in mine. The temperature plunged leaching warmth from the stone and driving a cold straight into May Dutton's bones. Outside, the dark felt alive, breathing, waiting. Rook Calder, who understood fear as well as any preacher, knew Scripture ordered bonfires lit in a wide ring around the mission ruins. Flames roared and threw long warped shadows across the crumbling adobe shapes that clawed at the walls like demons begging to be let in. Firelight erased any chance of slipping away unseen. To leave the mission now was to step onto a bright stage before a dozen rifles. Inside the shattered chapel, silence pressed down hard. Wind whistled through broken rafters. In the corner, Wyatt, the teenage outlaw they'd captured, breathed in ragged, wet pulls. May sat with her back against the cold stone altar. Eli was bound tight against her chest. He slept at last, his fever broken by the water. Sorek had bled to bring, but May couldn't close her eyes. Every blink showed Jack Dutton falling, the empty crib. Her hands clenched the sharps until her knuckles burned white. "They're gonna skin us," Wyatt whimpered. His face was gray sweat, shining on his lip despite the cold. His leg wound looked bad, the bandage soaked dark. "You don't know Calder. He don't just kill. He takes his time. Likes the sounds people make when they know it's done." Quiet May hissed low and dangerous. "Say another word and I'll gag you with your own boot." Sorek stood at the barricaded main entrance, peering through a crack in the rotting timbers. He looked carved from granite and pain. The bullet wound in his arm had stopped bleeding, bound tight with May's torn petticoat, but his movements were stiff. He turned and looked at her. Firelight cut across his face, sharp planes, deep lines, eyes carrying 1,000 griefs. He crossed the chapel without a sound and pointed to the back wall. There a small iron grate opened into an old drainage tunnel, narrow, clogged with weeds and debris. He signed quickly, motion sharp. "I go out. I draw fire. You run. The drain leads to the dry creek." May stared at him. He was offering himself as bait, offering to die so she could slip away like a rat through a culvert. "No," May said, voice shaking but firm. "They've got horses. They've got guns. Even if you pull them off, they'll run us down before I make a mile. I won't leave you to be butchered." Sorek shook his head, frustration flashing. He pointed to Eli, then to the drain again. "The boy must live. He needs a mother, not a memory," May countered. She stood and thrust Eli into Wyatt's arms. "Hold him. Drop him and I shoot you first." She paced the ruin, mind racing. "We can't run, and we can't trade shots with them. 3 rounds for the sharps. 6 for your Winchester. Wyatt's Colt has 5. 14 bullets against 12 men." She kicked a stack of rotting crates, anger spilling over. Wood split. Inside lay old mining tools, rusted pickaxes and tin canisters. May froze, knelt, and brushed away cobwebs. She lifted one canister. It was heavy. She scraped grime from the label. DuPont blasting powder, grade B, a relic from 50 years ago when friars had foolishly tried to mine copper in the hills behind the mission. Sorek, May whispered. He came to her side, took the canister, shook it by his ear. The powder shifted, clumped some, but loose enough. He pried the lid with his knife. Sulfur and charcoal stung the air. He met May's eyes, and for the first time the mask cracked. Respect flared there, fierce and clear. He understood. "We don't run," May said, jaw set. "We invite them in." The next hour blurred into desperate work. They found a massive cast-iron cauldron in the mission's ruined kitchen, heavy, rusted, perfect. They dragged it to the main gate right behind the timber barricade. May emptied 4 canisters of black powder into the pot. It wasn't meant to burn. It was meant to tear the night open. It had to tear, not burn. May Dutton combed the ruins, loading her apron with anything meant to maim. Rusted nails, jagged stones, shards of broken glass, heavy iron hinges ripped from rotten doors. She dumped the mess into the cauldron, stirring it deep into the powder. "No fuse," Sorek rasped. It was the longest sentence he'd spoken all night. They would have to make one. May tore the last of her petticoat into long strips, dampened them, then worked black powder into the cloth until it drank the dust. They buried the iron pot just inside the gate, tamped it with loose earth and straw, until it looked like any other patch of floor. The makeshift fuse snaked from the pot, running 20 feet back to the heavy stone altar where they would hold. "It's unstable," Wyatt whispered from the wall, cradling Eli. "That powder's old. It might fizzle, or it might blow early and kill us all." Then we pray, May said, dusting her hands. She took her baby back and checked him. Cool. Asleep. He had no idea he rested on the lip of a volcano. Midnight crept close. The taunts outside stopped. The silence pressed harder. It meant they were done playing. Sorek took position behind a pillar, Winchester trained on the wall tops. May crouched behind the altar, fuse end clenched in one hand. A torched chair leg wrapped in oil-soaked cloth waited in a sconce beside her. Then it began. Thump. Something heavy struck the courtyard. Then another. Dynamite, Sorek shouted, diving. Boom! The blast shook the mission, blowing out the last stained glass and raining dust and adobe. Horses screamed in the sacristy, slamming against their tethers. Before the dust settled, iron hooks clanged on stone. Ropes tightened. Men climbed. Hold May screamed, shielding Eli with her body. Sorek rose and fired once, twice, 3 times. A scream cut short as a body toppled back into blackness. Too many. Open the gate, Rook Calder's voice thundered. Ram it! A massive log slammed the timbers. Crack! Dust poured from the ceiling. The ancient doors groaned. Crack! They're through! Wyatt yelled, pistol shaking as he fired blindly. Shots thudding uselessly into wood. Save your bullets, May ordered. She looked to Sorek. He was reloading movements, fluid despite blood soaking his sleeve. He met her eyes and nodded. Wait. The gate buckled. The beam snapped like a twig. With a final bone-jarring crash, the doors blew inward, hinges tearing free. Night air rushed in, feeding the fires. Get them! Leave the woman alive, kill the rest, Calder roared. 7 men charged the breach, shadows stretching long and monstrous across the chapel floor. They shouted, fired confident, crowding the entry as they searched the dark. They stood square atop the buried pot. May's heart hammered. Time slowed. She saw eyes glint, muzzles flash the sneer on the lead gunman. She looked at the fuse, then the torch. For Jack Dutton, she whispered and jammed flame to cloth. The fuse caught at once. It didn't glow. It hissed like a striking viper. Fire raced across the floor, a slash of furious orange, cutting straight for the clustered men. One gunman glanced down, saw the line of flame between his boots. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened and the fuse met the pot. The world didn't explode. It shattered. For a breathless instant there was no sound at all. There was only a blinding swelling burst of white light that turned night into high noon. Then the shockwave struck a solid wall of force that slammed into May Dutton, ripping the breath from her chest. She was hurled backward, crashing onto the stone floor as the ground beneath the San Pedro mission bucked and heaved. She curled around Eli, shielding him with her body. Then came the sound, or rather the agony. A roar so immense it registered, not as noise but as pure pain tearing through her ears. The timber gate, the adobe arch, and the 7 men standing over the buried charge simply vanished. A column of fire smoke and pulverized stone blasted 50 feet into the air. The concussion snuffed out the remaining bonfires, plunging the perimeter into a choking gray half-light. May sucked in air thick with dust and sulfur. A shrill ringing drowned the world. She forced herself upright. Where the main gate had stood was now a yawning, smoking crater. The heavy doors were gone. The men were gone. Only a lone boot and a warped rifle barrel lay at the edge of the scorched earth. Up a hand clamped onto her shoulder. It was Sorek. He was coated in ash, a ghost clawing free of the grave. Blood trickled from his nose, but his eyes were sharp, steady. The blast had shaken them all. He alone seemed unbroken. Ride now, he shouted, though his voice reached her as if through water. They staggered to the sacristy where the horses were tied. The animals were wild with terror, rearing screaming whites of their eyes rolling. It took both of them to wrestle Bess under control. Sorek nearly threw May into the saddle, lashed Eli's cradle board to the horn with a leather thong, then swung onto his paint. gritting his teeth as his wounded arm took his weight. Wyatt, the young outlaw, had disappeared in the chaos, either fled or buried beneath rubble. There was no time to look. Through the smoke, Sorek yelled and kicked his horse forward. They charged not away from the danger, but straight into its throat. They thundered out of the chapel and into the shattered courtyard. The ground still burned, littered with debris. They vaulted a flaming beam and burst through the broken arch. Outside was madness. The explosion had sent the Calder men's horses into a frenzy. 2 riders lay sprawled in the dirt, thrown hard. Another staggered blindly, hands clamped to his ears. May didn't swerve. Bess, a plow horse, bred for pulling stone, hit the stunned outlaw like a freight engine, hurling him into the mesquite. Haya May screamed, snapping the reins, driving Bess into a full run. They tore through the perimeter and into open desert, leaving the smoking mission behind. Cold night air lashed May's face, burning her eyes, but she didn't blink. She rode for the moon low and blood orange above the Dragoon Mountains. They'd done it. They were alive. Crack! A bullet snapped past May's ear like a bullwhip. She looked back. Out of the dust cloud, like a demon clawing its way from hell, came a black stallion, and astride it rode Rook Calder. He hadn't been at the gate. He'd hung back watching his men die, waiting for the prey to break. He was untouched by the blast. His horse was fresh. Faster, May cried, flattening herself over Bess's neck. But Bess was spent, hauling May the baby in days of exhaustion. The black stallion closed the distance with terrifying ease. Calder wasn't shooting wild. He was reeling them in. He wanted it clean. Sorek saw him. He checked his Winchester empty. His belt, no cartridges. He met May's eyes, then looked back at Calder. Ahead lay a narrow pass miles off. They wouldn't reach it. Calder would catch them on the flats within minutes. Sorek made a sharp guttural sound and yanked his reins. His paint veered away, turning broadside to block the path. He drew his knife, the blade flashing silver in moonlight. No, May screamed, hauling at her reins. Sorek, don't. Calder never slowed. He lifted his Colt. His face was streaked with soot, eyes cold with calculation. He fired. The shot struck Sorek's horse square in the chest. The animal folded mid-stride, collapsing in a cloud of dust. Sorek was launched hard, rolling across stone before slamming into a tangle of sage. He lay still, one down. Calder roared, his voice carrying on the wind. He spurred the stallion past the fallen Apache, eyes locked on May. He was 50 yards back then, 30, then 10. May Dutton kicked Bess, sobbing, screaming, begging the horse to find wings. The heavy roan was lathered breath coming in raw, foamy pulls. Her own lungs burned. Rook Calder slid up alongside her, so close she caught the stink of tobacco on his coat, close enough to see the fevered shine in his eyes. He holstered his pistol. He didn't want to shoot her. He wanted to drag her from the saddle. He wanted the baby with his own hands. He drew a massive bowie knife, grinning like a skull. "Give me the boy, May," he shouted, lunging for her bridle. "It's done." May snatched the Sharps buffalo rifle from across her lap and brought it up, finger crushing the trigger. Click. The hammer fell on an empty chamber. She'd spent her last round on the cliff hours ago and never reloaded. Calder laughed, wet and rasping. "Empty, same as your life." He rose in his stirrups knife, lifting to slash reins, to cut Bess's throat and spill them both. May looked at the rifle in her hands. A Sharps Big 50, 30 inches of solid steel, heavy octagon barrel. 12 pounds. Not just a gun, a crowbar, a bludgeon. Rage-hot blinding flooded her veins. It washed away fear. It burned out the exhaustion. This man had killed Jack Dutton. He had terrorized Eli. He had burned her life to ash. I said. May screamed, the sound tearing free, raw and primal. She stood in the stirrups, balancing as the horses thundered neck and neck. She gripped the rifle by the stock and swung the steel barrel back like a bat. Calder saw it too late. His eyes widened, horror dawning. Leave us. May swung. She put every ounce of farm-hardened strength into it. Every ounce of grief. Every ounce of a mother's fury. The steel barrel struck Rook Calder's temple with a sick, wet crunch that cut louder than hooves. The impact was final. Calder was ripped from the saddle as if hooked by a freight train. He didn't scream. He didn't flail. He vanished, slamming into the packed desert with bone-breaking force. He tumbled ragdolling through dirt and cactus and came to rest face down. The black stallion kept running riderless, melting into night. May hauled on the reins, circling back. Her chest heaved. Her heart hammered like it meant to split her ribs. "Whoa, Bess. Whoa," she sobbed. The horse stopped. The desert went still. Even the wind fell quiet. May sat the rifle, slipping from numb fingers to the dirt. She checked Eli. He was awake, eyes wide, but silent. Safe. Slowly, terrifyingly, she turned Bess to the body. Rook Calder lay twisted and still. Then movement at the edge of sight, a shadow limping through brush. May gasped, hand flying to the empty scabbard, then froze. Sorek. He dragged his left leg. Blood masked his face from a gash at the brow. His arm hung useless. But he was upright. He passed May without a glance, eyes fixed on Calder. He reached the body and nudged it with his good foot. Calder rolled, eyes open, staring blind at the stars, skull crushed. Sorek stood over the man who had ordered his family's deaths. He didn't shout, he didn't spit, and he lifted Calder's wide-brimmed black hat, dusted it against his leg, and set it on his own head. Then he turned. Moonlight caught silver in his hair and blood on his face. For the first time since May had met him, the hard lines softened. He looked at Eli, then at May, raised a trembling hand, and signed one word. Peace. May slid from the saddle. Her legs gave out. She fell to the dirt, clutching her son, and for the first time in 2 days, she let herself cry. 3 days later, a strange procession rode into the busy streets of Tucson. They didn't go to the sheriff, everyone knew. He took coin from cattle barons. They went straight to the territorial mansion. May Dutton climbed the steps, dress torn and blackened with powder, a baby on one arm and a heavy sack of high-grade silver ore on the other. Behind her stood a ghost, an Apache warrior in a gunslinger's black hat, silencing polished clerks and politicians simply by standing still. Inside waited Governor Hale. May Dutton told her story. She poured the silver onto Governor Hale's mahogany desk and named the place where the bodies lay at the San Pedro mission. She told them where Rook Calder could be found. The bounty on Calder stood at $5,000. The silver claim on Dutton Ridge was confirmed and secured, filed in Eli's name. May never returned to the ridge. The memories of Jack Dutton dying in the dirt were too loud there. Instead, she used the reward and the silver to buy a wide ranch in the Verda Valley, a place of green grass and tall cottonwoods, where a river ran year-round and never went dry. Sorek did not stay. The settled world had no room for a man who carried a war inside him. The morning after the papers were signed, May went to his room at the boarding house with breakfast in hand. The room was empty, the bed untouched. On the pillow set atop a neatly folded blanket lay the silver rattle he had found in the canyon, the one he had tracked to save her son. May rushed to the window and scanned the dusty street. He was gone. She never saw him again. But years later, when Eli was grown and running the ranch, travelers came down from the high passes with stories. They spoke of an old Apache guardian moving through the badlands, a silent shadow who shielded the innocent and hunted the wolves that fed on the weak. And each time May heard those tales, she smiled, touched the silver rattle on her mantle, and whispered a prayer for the man who had faced 6 guns to save her baby. That is the legend of May Dutton and the silent Apache Sorek. In a country where the law was often decided by the caliber of a bullet, they proved the strongest weapon was not a Colt .45 but the ferocity of a mother's love and the loyalty of a stranger. It's a reminder that even in the darkest canyons, you're never truly alone if you have the will to fight. If this story set your pulse racing, do me a favor, hit that like button. It helps the channel grow and tells me you want more true grit westerns like this one. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. We've got a tale about a haunted gold mine coming next week that you won't believe. What do you think became of Sorek in the end? Did he find peace? Tell me in the comments. Thanks for watching. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.